Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? It's kind of a tough act to follow after that last one there with Rob Legato and David and all those, Sam and those guys. Great group of people. But my name is Eric Weaver. I work with the ETC, the Entertainment Technology Center at USC. We're a think tank that was formed about 30 years ago at the behest of George Lucas. What we do is we look at innovation and things coming around the corner and what's going on next. Things that come out of our organization include DCI, IMF, and other things where we get it about 70% of the way there and then pass it off to SMPTE. So what we've been looking at over the last couple of years is in-camera VFX and its application out there for the world. So about 2 years ago, we did Ripple Effect, and we published a 150-page white paper on how to do some of these techniques, what we're doing and whatnot. And now we've moved on to Fathead. And so what Fathead is it's an annual grant we give to an individual of diversity who graduate with a master's from USC. And right now we're working with an absolutely brilliant gentleman named C. Craig Patterson, just been fantastic to work with. And we bring all the resources together, and then we begin to do real-world R&D testing on a production like this so we can see what we've been working on actually in the field. So with that, I'm going to start by introducing a couple of people. Tom, you want to tell people about you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tom Turinplakko. I'm originally an independent producer from India, and I was able to get into the Virtual Production Fellowship held by Unreal Engine Epic Games. And once I finished that, I got introduced to a whole new world of what was possible with tools like Unreal Engine, as we see the world that we built for Fathead back behind us. And Eric posted on that channel saying, hey, we're doing this short film, this is ETC, and a little history about it. And I said, good. I jumped on board, and I call it Fellowship 2.0 because everything that I had learned in the fellowship, I got to apply it for real, and work with colleagues who were also from the fellowship, a lot of them, and got to work with great tools and integrations, which we will be able to represent in the white paper, which Eric has helped me bring on board on that as well. So that's been a great exercise. So some of those learnings are what we will share over here. Thank you.
My name is James Blevins. Before I became the post-production supervisor for Fathead, I was post-production supervisor on The Mandalorian. I heard what they were doing and had so many questions for Eric. And Eric said, those are great questions. Would you like to come on board? And it was before my coffee, and I said yes. So worked with this amazing crew, amazing team, and got in sort of just as they were ending their previs process and going into their shoot days. So a bit of just a quick ramp up into how this production was going to approach their virtual production shoot, and just contributed in whatever meaningful way I could.
Hi, everybody. Jack Wenzinger. I am the global lead for film and TV production partners for AWS, where we support basically moving content production, virtual production, VFX pipelines, animation into cloud-based workflow solutions. Been involved in these projects now for about 2 years. Eric started with the Ripple Effect. I started with a project called Lederhosen at the Hollywood Professional Association, where we proved that we could make a movie in a day, thanks to Joachim Zell, and also worked with Dell, with Tom Burns, and multiple partners came out of that. Those projects have matured, and what's great is to have solutions architects from AWS that have, that are in the M&E industry, apply the trade, and work with creatives and work with technology partners and subject matter experts in this rapidly innovating, innovation phase that we're going into. I was lucky to do the fellowship, same as Tom, and learn the creativity side of it, and it really becomes important in supporting partners in this process. So my team is supporting the Fathead project. We also got great learnings in supporting how cloud-enabled virtual production is going to work, and happy to share some of that with you today.
So yeah, I also did the fellowship. So actually, you graduated in the second class.
I was in the first large class. They had
Yep.
they had a test class, and then I was lucky enough to make it in the first one.
I was in the third one, and
Yeah, it was V6, yeah.
okay. So we all kind of came from that background of getting to play with this. So really what we're here to talk about today is in-camera VFX and the cloud. So we had a very distributed team, and we had to execute in that manner in which we can pull experts out of London, out of New York, out of all different kind of locations. Actually, as a matter of fact, you and me was in Greece working, so one of our VAD developers. So Tom, let's start with the beginning of the pipeline. Can you talk about some of the tools that we're using and the value of those tools?
Sure. So a lot of these tools that we brought into the picture were to bring all the creative contributors together and really milk the advantage of virtual production, which is early on being able to see what we want to get into that frame, being able to visualize, have every contributor be able to show rather than just, communicate in concepts. So we use tools like Bluescape, Airtable, Fifth Kind, and we had partners like Arch Technologies build us virtual machines pretty much on the fly. Eric mentioned, we had one of our key contributors in London who was also from the fellowship, who was my TA in the fellowship, and we relied on him on a number of things, from virtual human pipelines to a lot of the photogrammetry work and things like that. And so we needed to give him really powerful machines, and we were able to reach out to Arch platforms and give them the spec that we needed, and pretty much within the same day they were able to put up that machine and deliver it to us, and we didn't lose, and because of the time we really didn't lose any working day behind that thing. By the time they put it up, Pawan woke up in London and he had a machine ready for him.
So let's talk about the problem statement here. So a couple of things that we were focusing on pushing the boundaries in is things like sound mitigation, the echo you get problems, virtual beings and the whole meta-human world. What can we do with that, especially in the mid and foregrounds? And metadata end-to-end. So can you talk about the problem that Pavan was trying to solve and kind of how it worked with the wall?
Sure. So the world that you see behind us is called the Ragamuffin Camp, and the film Fathead is set in this what C. Craig calls like a trash land where these kids have no adult supervision, and they're trying to make their way in that world, and they've got specific rules that they have to follow and things like that. So of course, in the middle of COVID, while we were shooting, we couldn't have a location with about 50 or 100 kids in there. So it was very important to populate this world behind us with about 60 to 100 digital humans. And so we were able to use a number of techniques to achieve that. And part of it was to do photogrammetry, which was capturing the real kids in costumes and then shooting them at the scan truck with about 210 cameras, and then putting together the whole asset using reality capture and other things. But all of this was being transmitted and worked on the cloud, because we were able to use Fifth Kind to put all of the photogrammetry stuff in there, communicate with all of our artists around the world, and achieve the results. ICVR helped us a lot with photogrammetry as well, and so did our friends up in London and Greece at UME.
Yeah, so that was one of the fun, interesting things, including, you want to talk a little bit about the mocap and some of the tools we used in the cloud to get some of the skeletal data and other things.
So once we capture the asset, which is basically the digital human, we have to now animate them in this world and make them look real, just like the other actors who are going to be on stage. And so we were able to use tools like Neutom's Perception Neuron and a markerless, suitless motion capture tool called Move.ai, which is based out of London. And one of the challenges that we faced when we were using that tool was the processing time involved in getting this data to actually apply and see if we achieved what we wanted on the day of the shoot. And so in our discussions with Move.ai, the necessity to achieve quicker results and probably even real-time results became far more eminent to them. And so they started investing their time trying to research into it. They got an Epic Mega Grant to do that. And they partnered with AWS to use cloud computing to be able to process that data in real time. So that wouldn't have happened without the cloud assisting them to achieve that.
Well, what's fun is you get and I love the toys. You guys are talking about all the great high tech toys that are coming out, and the innovation around that is fantastic. But there was also I was overwhelmed when you first brought the project to us, and of course, it's Project Fathead, and so of course your executives that are supporting you are like, okay, what's this? But it's so I need to see what's the project, the storyboard, the budget. What are we trying to achieve here? And there's a gentleman that was working on the project, Ben Baker, and they were asking for AWS to get involved, and we didn't even know that we were already involved. So Airtable and Bluescape both run on AWS, and they're both fantastic partners. But Airtable specifically, Ben Baker built out all of your logistical infrastructure in Airtable. For those of you that don't know, Airtable is a lot like, I'm going to call it FileMaker 2.0 for the people that have been in this business a long time. You all know how that's been used, but essentially it's an easy-to-use database tool where he built, and keep me honest here, he built out the physical asset management components, he built out all the character development, the storyboards, the scheduling, the sites, the full project plan, and any of the cost controls, the approval mechanisms. He had it all in one place, and he had it all managed. It was absolutely phenomenal. And then, of course, Bluescape doing the creative coordination, where they all had one virtual whiteboard to work together, was pretty amazing too.
I'm regretting not bringing slides now. No, but these are some wonderful tools. And another thing that we try to do when we're doing this is we secretly attempt to do API connections between these different tools. So building a pipeline where you can pass assets between things if at all possible. So some of that stuff is really amazing. Another area in the very beginning that was so important for us was the VAD development. So we actually did everything, again, obviously from scratch. Tom, you want to talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so one of the advantages of using Unreal Engine to visualize your world that you're going to build is basically iteratively being able to build these assets and add layers onto it without losing. So I call it iterative, non-destructive process that we have in being able to communicate between all the artists and creatives involved and build in a way that leads to your final pixel. So right from once we had the storyboards ready, we were able to then do a process called gray boxing, which is basically using low poly assets to build the world out, just to know what the environment's going to look like. Put some mannequins in there just to get position data, put a virtual camera in there, lock your shots, get your design of how this action's going to play out and things like that. And once there's an idea that everybody can see now, the way that the director wants to communicate the story and agree on, we bring in the next layer of artists. In this case, we have to build out worlds like this. So we had teams at RIT, which is the Rochester Institute of Technology, UME, which, as Eric mentioned, was in Greece, and we had a few other partners who were all volunteers who came from our Unreal Engine Fellowship, and we started building up the assets. And part of those assets were also a lot of photogrammetry that was collected in Tucson, Arizona. We were able to bring all of those assets again into this environment, build this up. And once we laid it out in a manner that the director could agree, we had Happy Mushroom come in and bring it to Final Pixel the way that you see behind us. And that was very, very a cool process, made possible by a tool like Perforce, which again relied heavily on the cloud to allow all of us in disparate locations working on the exact same project in an iterative, non-destructive manner.
Yeah, so essentially what happens at the very beginning of the project is, of course, setting up Perforce Helix, which is the change control system that all the creatives are familiar with and use. It seems to be the lion's share product in the industry for for this. Yeah, absolutely. But we connect that with what we call a content lake in AWS. So it's essentially a centralized storage medium, and think of it as everything coming to the storage and the creativity and the assets. And essentially, it's controlled with security, asset controls, but it allows a community of people to work together. So it's multiple creatives, it's multiple companies, but they're all accessing the same content lake where storage is being managed and tiered and controlled.
So actually, speaking of that, you had another wonderful person in your organization, Khan, And so when we did these photogrammetry assets, like one asset can take up a lot of storage and be a lot of photographs. For example, we created roughly 70 key assets, which represents 39,000 photographs. At about 60 megapixels each. So people like Colin were helping manage the RC license and all that storage and all that stuff. I don't know how much you worked with him on that, but that was really amazing work because you're trying to bring all of that stuff together. It's not a simple pipeline when it comes to photogrammetry and custom assets.
That's fantastic. I actually didn't work a lot with him, but when you said someone in my organization, I thought you meant my son. So my
Yes,
son
his
also
son actually was on it.
Sat off screen and did the fellowship at the same time I did. He's learned Unreal, and he's now got a name for himself. He's working for his own company, and he contributed to the assets in Fathead.
So one of the tricks that we had to deal with is that we have a volunteer army. This is people giving of their time. It's not like a paid gig. So you have people that come up and come down and come on and come off. And actually, one of the sadder stories is Perforce is actually a little bit complicated to use. And I think I've seen at least 2 people cry in meetings because they thought they lost everything. I mean, literally more than once.
Getty thought he deleted the tree from. You had someone from Weta that was working on it, and he goes, "What's Weta?"
All right, so let's talk about some of the physical production and how physical production then bridged back to cloud. So, James, can you talk a little bit about our setup in the DIT cart and all that environment?
So one of the challenges we found out early on The Mandalorian was that you had to work collaboratively with the camera department. Or if you want to flip that, the camera department has to work collaboratively with everyone else. It's really, really critical that virtual production, especially at this stage of its evolution, that the people who are working in that space, and it's a medium all its own, understand that a lot of this stuff needs to be protected as you shoot it. An example of protecting would be creating reference monitoring for this workspace and communicating that this is where you look to see what it's going to look like in post. It's not going to be in camera, and it might be at the DIT cart, but that's going to feed this particular monitor. And if you do that, then rather than the DP shooting what he thinks or she thinks is going to be the final pixel, you can do things like protect for 2/3 of a stop. There's a lot of work going on, new contributors to productions happening in production design now. And a lot of that money is being spent, much to the chagrin of classic visual effects companies. So if you want to retain the textures that are in this, and you have a DP who says, I'm going to shoot this dark, there's no getting that texture back from the wall. So it's really important that you communicate that all the way up and down the production supply chain. Otherwise, you're going to have a very unhappy time in post. So that was one of the first discussions I had when I came on as post, was just protecting the color pipeline and communicating that while this is amazing and photoreal is great, it'd be fantastic if what we saw is what we got in the camera. The wiser move is to take a look at a reference monitor which accommodates the color pipeline, and that way you all can say that is what our target is.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point. So I also run a technical working group with some of the top people in the industry looking at engineering problems. And what we found is we did a shoot off once, and what we found is that what your eye sees against a particular wall, what a sensor sees, and what the camera sees, depending on which camera you have, all will look different. And again, you're seeing something that looks a little cartoonish here, but you can't shoot to that. You've got to do it to the reference monitor, like you said.
Well, Rob Legato in the panel before this even said that the truth is in the dailies, right? And they would point to that and say that's, what you see is not necessarily what you get here. Also, these walls are they're challenging to use, especially if you're trying to light subjects with them, because while you're looking at something that is that looks like you're going to be able to light someone effectively with it, the energy coming off of these walls in red, green, and blue are very tight, high frequencies, and they deliver the red, green, and blue that you want out of them. However, they're missing an essential component, which is something that these lights up here are supplying, which is full spectrum light, which feeds all of your secondary colors. And so when you do a test on color, skin tone specifically, you can see why shooting science fiction environments is actually a little easier to do, because it'll sort of explain away why someone's skin looks a little bit pale or pink or not the right shade of brown. This is a very tight gamut that you have to understand before you shoot.
Yeah, we have some wonderful work with Paul Devevic in our group on the lighting setups as well, and how these compare. Jack, did you or were you involved at all with the DIT cart to the cloud? And do you know all of that infrastructure there, or how that was set up? Or would you?
I could actually open that up a little bit. The great thing about working with Amazon is, while it was a volunteer effort on my part, we had unlimited resources. What do I mean by that? Well, I walked on and I said, prove it, right? Can you give me a 10 gigabit pipe? And they said, sure. A guy named Zach Wilner was really helpful. So we tested it out and got 800 megabytes per second to the cloud. The 4K RE raw data writes to the card at 740 megabytes per second. So technically, I was able to copy off the card faster than the camera could record to it. That data went for safety to an S3 bucket, but was immediately copied to an FSX volume surrounded by Arch machines. This is all in the cloud. An FSX volume is specifically designed to provide high bandwidth pulls in a certain region of the country or of the globe, so that artists can...
high bandwidth block storage.
That's right. And so that allowed us to enable really cool tools like on-set editorial. So we were able to have an on-set editor who was actually in their home, who was receiving this material within half an hour of it being shot. Hey, Eric. And it was able to be assembled before the end of day. And so there could be a sanity check with the director and with the whole crew to say, oh my gosh, I think we didn't get the shot we needed. And while they were there on the virtual production stage, go and do that pickup real quick, or pick it up on the next day. Never forget that you don't want to be sorting things out in this environment. At its worst case, it's a $150,000 day. So if anyone is trying to figure stuff out, there's a little bit of pressure, and the money's burning right in the middle of the stage.
So James, let me ask you this: Were you doing non-proxied workflows?
Yeah, let me be clear. So that data that went to an FSX volume, I'm in post right now. We're color timing. I'm not moving that data. The data has not moved since the time I put it there. There is no proxy workflow. I am editing, I am collaborating, and now I'm going to color time with Blackmagic's new HEVC 10-bit color feed and a true color timing interface feeding back to the remote resolve. That trick apparently works. So as I said, when I was working with Amazon, I was a little selfish, since I'm not going to get paid. I'm going to try some cool stuff out. And so this is one of those cool things we were able to play with. It's pretty amazing.
So wait a minute, did you just say we're doing everything in the cloud there?
We're doing everything in the cloud on this show. All the posts is in the cloud. I'm even going to package the IMFs from the same data set. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, in Fifth Kind, we were also able to live stream everything from the set. So what the camera was seeing, and also a witness camera, that information was being live streamed on Fifth Kind. And why it was useful was because we wanted to keep the number of people on the set low because of COVID protocols, and some of the key contributors were working remote, like Scott Squires, our VP supervisor, a very key component of how all these things operate, was literally conducting the whole thing remote, connecting with the stage operators and being able to see exactly what was happening, communicating with the creative team, and being able to achieve results.
I think it's a good time to mention the sort of the in-camera visual effects sort of the evolution, the new contributors that are coming online. So you kind of have to sort of piece this together. You're looking at sets that were designed by a production designer. This is a different bucket of money, we'll say, right, in true production. These are people who come up and design the look of the show, but can also commission, and they did so on some other virtual production shows I worked on, commission the actual sets that will light the wall. That is normally the domain of visual effects. And so what you're looking at is in certainly high-budget classic visual effects, episodics and film shows, those will be using those budgets, and those VFX houses will insist on that control of controlling what's on the wall. However, those production designers are true blue artists, and they are contributing final pixel assets to the virtual production space. This is the rise of the micro studio. This is going to be production designers who are really great artists. The scene painters are coming in, everyone's coming in, and they're creating assets which need no further touch. So yes, the complaint is all of these people are getting pulled forward to contribute way before they would in a normal production timeline. However, there seems to be a benefit that they're actually creating assets which will be used for production. There will be pushback from classic visual effects vendors in this space. But the $2 million, $3 million productions are going to come up from the bottom, as art often does, and you're going to start seeing these really cool shows that are being made with true in-camera visual effects.
I'm really glad you like that word. So right after the fellowship, I wrote a blog post because of a gentleman that I met during that process, Haz Dalul, hazfilm.com, who has his own little production company. But he had gone and started using game engine technology and had determined that, through the use of the cloud and during the pandemic, he was able to just work with a handful of folks and start creating really compelling content. And he's winning production projects with just a handful of his friends. And that really kind of changes the dynamic. And while that works on a small scale for a few friends and a few stations, something the size of Fathead, that user experience, okay, we've hit the creative mark, we can make the creative happy, but you still have to manage and operate it. So something you said at the very beginning, Eric, as far as we built it from scratch on the virtual arts department, I think you built this for Fathead from scratch, but the infrastructure behind it that set up the management and the support services for that VAD was Arch Platform. And they put it, they were born out of the VFX industry building, GPU workstations in the cloud and making a highly performant platform, which I know she's demoed for me that she can turn those a studio in the cloud up in like 40 minutes.
So it kind of brings to rise the 24-hour working cycle. So now all of a sudden, you're looking at storyboards, other things, you're gray boxing, and then you send your notes off to a team like in Greece, so with UMI. So then they'd be working all night. Well, it wasn't all night for them, and then having everything delivered to you in the morning. So you'd come and look at the new stuff and make comments or edits or changes to that stuff. It's a genuine global studio on that point. One thing that I came up yesterday in a conversation over at Ted Sholowitz on the other hall is this idea that you can do magic hour 24 hours a day, and they said, well, what's the new dilemma then? Well, the dilemma is time. You only have these stages so long. You're not going to book this indefinitely. So you're always under that gun of you better know what you need, and you better get what you need in that window. So...
And the film industry's always had the philosophy that use the cheapest tools and the smallest teams to iterate and to explore, because the bigger the team sizes grow, the more expensive the resources become. You don't want to be, figuring things out. At that point, you're just executing. So that becomes even more eminent with these stages, because once you're on those stages, you just want to capture what the camera can get from that day and take it into post.
Yeah, really. It stresses the importance of previs, right? And previs in this space is unique in that it is I've been asking someone to build a game called Let's Make a Movie. And we'll all go meet there, and we'll put on our Oculus rigs, and we'll go and pull our lights and sets, and people can upload tiles and that sort of thing. Because this space of collaboration is really, the keys are being held by people who need to create those spaces to do production design. But I think in order to really enable this conversation, we need to, and frankly, start creating new assets for the metaverse. We need to have a space where all of us can sort of contribute. And it needs to be easily accessible, pretty turnkey. It would be nice to see someone really dedicate some resource to make that happen. Because if you don't do that, you will find people coming onto a virtual stage for the first time and going, oh, now I get it. The thing's over there. Oh, well, that changes it. Okay, now I got to rethink this. That is exactly the wrong time to be changing your mind about what the day's going to look like.
Yeah, and one of the things is some of the processes involved in this, because the elements that you see over here, from the geometry to the textures and things, are very heavy. So these file sizes could be really large, and especially when we talk of photogrammetry, like Eric mentioned, there are thousands of pictures for these assets that we have to stitch together to build the geometry, project the textures onto them, and it can be very resource intensive. So working in the cloud helps you get kind of an elastic capacity that basically gives you the kind of compute power you need for the tasks that you're basically sending into the cloud. And I don't know the exact terms, I'm not a cloud specialist, but from a creative side, that we just found that we had what we needed in terms of compute power available to us when we needed it. And probably Jack can emphasize on that.
Well, you actually just brought up a great point, and why we love these projects, because you find as people are innovative, first of all, innovation always starts by looking like a bad idea, and so you kind of have to get past that. But when you start these projects, it's a lot of fun, because you realize you put some creatives in a room, and you put some IT engineers in a room, and media specialists, and you find they don't even speak the same language. In fact, you have one person saying camera raw, you have another person saying OCF, another person saying OCN, and they'll actually bicker a little bit to figure out what we're going to call it to go forward. And I know from the projects I've worked with talking about storage, I'd have Joachim Zell come up to me and he'd be like, you say it's a content lake. Is it a lake? Is it a cloud? I don't know. But he has a good point. We have to have kind of a common language, and it's important that we work together on these things. So
I'd give a shout out to the Netflix Common Language with the VES Society. That's a great resource there. I think it was mentioned on the prior panel. But they have, I think, about 400 people on their Discord server, if you're not paying attention to that. But it's definitely worth following.
Excellent. I was curious. So, obviously, the way these stages have started, we're innovating fast, so you're putting all of the equipment at the LED stage as far as how these have all kind of originated. And now we're looking at opportunities as far as how the cloud can be kind of an outrigger to support pre-production, on-set, and post-production services, and identifying the true value there. And I honestly think, as you look at the LED stages and you have, a strong investment in panels, you have a strong investment in GPU, you have a strong investment in storage, over time, and as tech refresh happens, because you're going to get better refresh rates, pixel rates, you're going to have, NVIDIA's going to have the next best GPU with, probably 2 months, 3 months, right? And so as that happens, there is going to be a harmony as far as what the cloud is good at, and it will be an outrigger for these types of virtual production services, stabilizing that virtual production pipeline all the way through. So I'm going to throw it to you with a question. I'm just curious. So we kind of talked about pre-production. We also talked about on-set and how we were able to help there, but in the post-production phase of virtual production, I think you worked with Moses or others. Were there any cloud components that came into post-production, like deferred rendering or?
Yeah, so we didn't get to use it in the principal photography stage, but that is something that we probably will experiment with in our second unit shoot. So in communicating with our friends at Gnosis, we were introduced to the technology that they have called near time. The idea that so we turn off a lot of features that Unreal can provide, like ray tracing, where you get real reflections and very good quality rendering, and we have to lose some of those so that we can have a lag-free performance of the environment on screen. And so using near time, the idea is that it's a deferred rendering, so to speak. And so as soon as you've captured the shot in camera, you're able to send the environment into the cloud, and using cloud compute, be able to render it with all the features amped up in Unreal Engine and get a finished 4K resolution, really high-end image that is comparable to what you get in VFX, and then be able to composite it back into the frame. And that's really a great solution they've provided. So I'm happy about that.
It gives you a lot of flexibility, right? If you suddenly find yourself compressed and these stages, people are fighting for them. And so if you can, sometimes it gives you a measure of safety to get to post with some of these effects. And you can get as close as you need to light the scene, which is really the benefit of these walls. And then you can layer it in the post process.
So one other tool we used, not on this one, but on a prior one, we were shooting at Lux Machina, and we had to blend the environments, and you have no idea how many different types of dirt color there are, and blending that between the stage and the background. So Phil Gallagher was sitting there and doing real-time corrections via Perforce with a team in Santa Monica when we were in the Arts District, right? So he's like, okay, you're going to have to change this, you're going to have to adapt that, you're going to do that. And just sitting there to get it right, and spending the whole morning on that. And it's all via Clearview Flex, Soho, or something like that on the environment. So that was another really cool tool. We didn't do it on this one because we had quite an impressive stage, so I won't go there. But any other comments or thoughts that we should share with the audience along the line?
Well, just to go back to the benefits of cloud. In order to collaborate, one of the key components is centralization. That's what the cloud will get you right off the bat. Even if it's not that fast in terms of the storage, and you may have real ambition and you want to get some really, some 4K streaming off of it. Forget all that for a moment. This is really difficult, and we've already hinted that Perforce, which is sort of on the front line of handling these assets, is actually part of like a 4-application solution of people contributing to these assets. The approve kill process on developing in this medium requires centralization, either through tools like Airtable, but those assets have to live somewhere too. And the real key to making sure that the final asset is the final asset is delivering it to one single spot. I think it's crucial to this process. You'll see centralization of these data sets sitting in various production houses, but on Fathead, I call it the mothership, he calls it a content lake, but basically it was where much of the collaborative data was sitting. It's impossible to think of a model that would work decentralized.
So one of the assets over here is basically talent, right? So we bring people with a lot of creativity and specific skill sets, and that's the big challenge over here. And luckily, with a project like Fathead, for example, we have people being generous with their time and their intellect for the service of this industry in a way. We're all contributing to it, and then all of that is being captured into an open source document, the white paper, and being shared back with the industry. So much information, so much conversation, so much input is coming from all these sides, and we don't want to lose it. And that's the IP that's being created over. That's the property that's being created. And even in a studio environment, the IP is really the product, the creative asset that you create at the end of the day. So once you've created it, it has to live somewhere, and that's another thing that I like about the cloud is the idea that it could rest there depending on. So I again don't know the terms of it, but it could rest in the cloud, and you could access it at any time depending on where and how you need it to continue to share it with audiences and put it into the market. But during the product creation phase as well, because we were working with these multiple partners from around the world, one of the things that came up with our conversations with our friends at Arch Platform Technologies is that all of our VAD artists and creatives working on their own computers at their home, all requiring 3090s or A6000 GPUs, which are very expensive cards, they could all be using these virtual machines. And these virtual machines sit in the same environment. They're using the same cloud environment. So when we have done the work that we need, we've pulled the file down to our computer on that particular virtual machine, did the work that we needed to do, and we need to push it back into the depot, which is basically the common file or the project that everyone is accessing. If we do it on our home computer with 20 megabytes of upload speed, that's like, you're basically just wasting your whole night waiting for that thing to go back so everybody else can see what you did, and multiply that about 60 artists who are working from around the world. It's just impossible to get. You lose a lot of time. So with the virtual machine sitting in the same environment, the cloud environment, and these artists accessing what they're doing over there, as soon as they finish the work and they need to push it back for the rest of them to see, it's immediate. And that really was a great advantage that I felt, smaller studios could really take advantage of this and source their talent from around the world, set up an infrastructure in the cloud without having to shell thousands of dollars trying to get the latest GPU, keep their computers up to date, having to figure out how their internet connection is going to be fast enough so they don't lose all this time pushing data up and down.
So Eric, I'd like to ask you a question. So, I come to you when I'm trying to understand virtual production, and James, sorry, I didn't. But there's still a lot of challenges. There's a long road of innovation that still has to be done here, and we talked about a lot of subjects. We've talked about a lot of complexity. And I know when I first got into these projects, I first thought, oh well, I came from media asset management, so I knew metadata, data about the file. I had no idea that the camera has metadata, the lens has metadata, the light has metadata, and the tracking systems have metadata, and then of course there's probably 10 systems that I still have to learn that probably also have metadata. So so that's one problem that's there. But you've also talked about lighting. So do the lights have to follow like an ASIS standard or 2020 or 703 on set, or is it, or is file interchange a problem where people should be focusing? Where we're talking about the virtual art department and everybody being creative and working together, and we know that there's a universal file format USD that's bringing this together. But how mature are these things, and where would you like to see a lot of acceleration or experimentation? Do you think that the industry is ready for?
So I would say that there's three primary groups out there right now that are providing information and education. You're going to have SMPTE RIS, which is Carrie Grubin and that group. So they're going to be primarily early education and then beginning and evolving standards such as the camera metadata. So if you look into some of the subgroups, Dave Stump was on the prior panel. Dave's doing a fabulous job with helping build a tool that's the key metadata there. So there's several other working groups within that one. Again, the next one I mentioned was the VES Society and basically their Discord work, where you're seeing I wouldn't know how to break out a lot of theirs, but they're a kind of a thriving community of different components and aspects there. And then there's the ETC. And so we're a little bit more of technical working group where we're getting in there with like Paul DeVevic and looking at these lighting standards. How do we get to DMX? How do we have a common DMX standard? How do we pixel map everything to some of these stages? What are our problems going to be? Like you said, with the panels and the spectrum of light, it's not the same. So hard actual details, understanding the color science, understanding all those things.
So in summation, we're just at the beginning.
Yes, we're just at the beginning. And another kind of analogy I'm kind of brewing on is it's a little bit like going from, you get out of college and you're really great at making spaghetti dinner. This is French cooking where you have to locally source most of your ingredients. I mean, it's a whole nother level of complexity. So,
am I hungry?
With that, I'd actually like to see if anybody had any questions before we run out of complete time. Alrighty. Scott?
Thanks, guys. James, you touched on it a little bit, and also you, Tom, about just the computing power that is behind just generating the images that go on the screen. But can you elaborate a little bit on that? And then also, James, how much data are we talking about going up to the cloud every day?
Cool. Yeah, I didn't note the exact gigabytes or terabytes or petabytes
I won't
of
know
data
until I archive the
Yeah,
show.
yeah.
And then we'll see how much of an eyebrow raiser it is.
Yeah, I've largely been focused on the image itself, and then of course the time. How quickly can we get to that final
Right,
image?
so
how quickly can get?
I can tell you this: a fix came in where we were working, and we had all the bandwidth we needed to get it there as fast as possible. However, the update took about 3 hours to get the update, and that's a nervous 3 hours because of where we are. We're in prep on the stage, right? So we find other things to do waiting for the data. So that's not insubstantial. That's a large chunk of data. I think at that point, though, we were accepting a rendered output at that point that had actually been sort of burned and baked to final. And so that was about 3 hours. A little bit of coordination is involved. You have to go find something else to do while you're waiting for the update.
Yeah. And my thought is that studios have to start looking at productions also having a data center kind of attitude. The idea that we're creating so much data, like Jack mentioned, that almost every tool involved in this process is now generating a set of data that's very essential. So when we were shooting on this film, we had one sequence which had some visual effects components. So we had to have a visual effects creature interact with physical characters. The creature basically exists in the virtual world, but then has to transition, jump out of that world and interact with a physical actor, right? So we were able to use techniques which have already existed with simulcam and stuff like that, but being able to render out the Unreal Engine environment as well as the assets as if it was captured in camera, we needed lens data. So we used Zeiss CP3s with the Coke/I lens data. So it has lens distortion, lens shading, all of that information in there, in addition to the camera data. So we're able to reproduce all of those shots to look like it was all captured in camera. So it's very important to keep all of these things together.
One thing that we kind of missed as far as talking about the benefit of being able to go directly from DIT to cloud is now you don't have LTOs piling up at set and trying to figure out where what you're managing where, or there's the potential of this as we move forward. Because if you use something like IMT Cloud Soda, which allows easy use of looking at your S3 buckets versus your Glacier buckets, your cheaper storage tiers, you can then move those raw materials down into Deep Glacier. You still have your proxy view, and it's a very cost-effective HSM model in the cloud.
So just to reiterate, LTOs are exactly where they should be, which is in the Glacier process. It was amazing to work on a show where we were doing a workflow which I believe was bondable. We had a local copy of the data, but the minute it hit S3, it was covered from meteor strike. It began to migrate to 5 different geographical locations. I
don't know if the 11.9's durability was done off meteor strike, but probably.
Well, I'm just saying, very small meteor, But it saves us from LTO processes, which are, great and steadfast, but should be at the archive process.
I do actually have all the numbers from Zach Wilner about exactly how many files, how much data was stored up there, all that stuff. That's what I was looking for on my phone there, but can't find it right now.
It will be in the white paper.
Yeah,
So
it will be in the white paper.
It is in the white paper.
So one last question. We're about to run out of time. Okay.
Hi there. I just want to ask about the Perforce process. So Perforce for the entire creative group, I get it in the cloud so everyone can work. Then when it got to set, do you have an isolated Perforce set just to work on iterations on set? Is that or are you working off Perforce in the cloud on set?
Do you want to crack this open?
yeah, so the exact workflow is still something that we're all investigating, right? And then there are also questions about partners having their own methodologies and things like that. So between multiple partners, we did have that thing that they had separate Perforce licenses. They wanted to maintain their own systems. They had their own access to cloud and things like that. So we did have some redundancy there, but the ideal workflow is still something that we have to investigate how it works between multiple
The
partners.
ideal workflow would actually create a space where the changes that were made on set, and there are reasonable and unreasonable requests made on set, and you have to know the difference, which is also evolving. But that is ideally, those changes would also be part of the final deliverable. And right now, there is no easy way to take on-set changes and echo them back. So that's something that needs to be worked on. We're at the beginning stages here of a very complex puzzle with a lot of moving parts.
So one way to deal with that. Am I still on there? So one way to deal with that complex puzzle is you have to set up a grammar or a language for when your different partners come on how you're going to name things, how it's going to be working, how you're going to stay consistent through that whole process. But to answer your question, in this situation, we did keep at least two major copies of Perforce, one in the cloud, and we did have one local because we had such a large volume. Any other questions?
I just want to say also, there's sort of this predisposition to think that these volumes are continuing to get larger and larger, and you need to work on a large stage. Yes, these are large. However, there are so many things you can do with a smaller set of panels, and you're going to see this coming out of commercial work and that sort of thing. These panels are beginning to show up on sort of transformer-like trucks that are unfolding, and you're getting mobile virtual production stages starting to go where the work is. That's, I think, a really interesting growth.
So there's also a really amazing demo by AJ Wedding at Orbital Studios, if you look up his LinkedIn, in which they have no set design whatsoever. They're against a fairly small wall, about 15 by 180, and it looks gorgeous. It's a Trinity rig and OptiTrack moving everything, and you're like, wow, that's it's in a small stage, so it doesn't necessarily need to be going larger. Alrighty, well, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.